There's a warning today that inequalities in pay and indeed opportunities across the UK are so extreme that they're threatening democracy.
Britain has a class problem.
Even though you worked so hard, there's always going to be a barrier.
And working class young people trying to get top jobs can feel it.
You feel like this is an environment where there's still a lot of class-based prejudice.
Well, there is. Anybody that says they're doing all that they can for diversity is lying.
I've been looking at some of Britain's most elite professions.
You were called an oik, weren't you?
So I believe.
In search of some solutions.
My fear is that there are far too many organisations at the moment who see it as a PR opportunity.
Are you trying to make classism illegal?
Very good to see you.
And asking those in power how they're tackling it.
Can you see why people might be sceptical that a cabinet so dominated by the privately educated would make class inequality a priority?
All right, let's do it.
I was making the journey from London, the heart of the UK's media industry, to the West Country town of Taunton.
Hi, I'm all right.
Nice to meet you, chap. How you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm all right. You all right?
Working class student Seth was living at home while finishing his degree at Exeter University.
Did you have a good journey down?
Oh, it was easy.
Yeah.
He's on track for a first-class degree and wants to break into my own industry, journalism.
What are the prospects for journalists around here?
So, I mean, you could go to BBC Radio Somerset, you could go to BBC...
There's a little twinkle in your eye as you said that.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, BBC Radio Somerset, I've not had the pleasure of listening to it for a while. It probably does amazing stuff, but that's not the summit of your ambitions. You want to go beyond that.
Yeah, I would expect so, yeah.
What have you tried to do to break into these professions?
When I finished college about 4 years ago, I applied to the BBC and I got to the final point of their apprenticeship.
I feel suddenly like I need to answer to the BBC. So how did that go? How was that process?
The process was okay, and then obviously I didn't get it at the end.
Did you get any feedback? Did they tell you?
So I got... Oh my God.
You're like pulling things out, which is just like this chronicle of all your efforts.
Well, I also did a Freedom of Information request about the scheme I'd applied for.
You're a terrifying journalist, aren't you?
Seth's Freedom of Information request, or FOI, revealed data on successful applicants to the scheme.
The ethnicity breakdown was BAME, it's a black, Asian, minority ethnic, it was 44.4%, and white UK citizens 50, the rest 55.6%. Now, how did that strike you? Did that strike you as quite high for BAME and quite low for white UK citizens?
Yeah, but I don't want to say that it's unfair, because I completely agree that it's a good idea that BAME background people should be getting into these jobs.
I asked the BBC about this scheme. They told me that 40% of that year's apprentices were from lower socio-economic backgrounds. So class is something they're tracking and taking seriously, alongside more visible forms of diversity. Now, there are lots of reasons why Seth may not have got onto this scheme, but he had raised an important question. What does diversity mean?
Some people would say my getting a job at the BBC shows the BBC embracing diversity, but I grew up in London. I went to an elite university and I studied English. You know, I'm an arts graduate. And in a way, you could say, well, maybe he's a different skin colour, different ethnicity, but he basically ticks a lot of the other boxes of people at the BBC.
In my eyes, it's been inverted in terms of, you know, for people like me, it's very difficult to get onto that and into that sort of industry.
What did you think that you lacked that the other successful candidates did have?
So I think sort of the spoken word is an important one. So this idea of my Somerset accent can often seem or imply sort of a very rural background. So for me, when I watch things or listen to things on the BBC, that representation for someone like me is minute. Genuinely, I don't think they want people like me.
I was a part of that process. I didn't know why they came to the decisions they did. But I know that the current Director General of the BBC is genuinely committed and needs to be committed to representing the whole country and making sure that people who are from working class backgrounds in rural Somerset and are white feel as represented by the BBC as people who live in North London and have to have Indian heritage. So I feel like we've got a problem. I feel like we've got social problem, I feel like we've got an industry problem, and I feel like you've got a problem, which is that you're trying to get a job. And I would really like to help if you can bring yourself to, next time you're in London, do you want to have a coffee outside the Beeb, and then I can just show you around?
Yeah, definitely.
As I turn right here, I'm confronted by a magnificent zebra crossing, heralded by two marvellous Belisha beacons.
Hurry up, you pair of mugs! Get out of the way!
Oh, sorry, we're making a documentary. It's a documentary for Radio 4.
Seth's not the only one to notice that my industry does lack diversity when it comes to class.
Come and sit down, Alison and Peter. This is a very exciting moment for me. I'm just blown away to be in the same room as the two people who came up with my most favourite show of all time, Number One. Now, let me introduce to my team. I love diversity. I went to Oxford. Sorry, what I meant to say is I didn't go to Oxford. I did!
In 2018, British broadcasters were told some uncomfortable facts. Between 60 and 70% of their staff came from middle-class backgrounds. The figure nationally is 31%.
The truth of it is that it's an industry that's posh. When that research was done, Channel 4 came out as the poshest. How can you possibly be anything other than embarrassed by that?
The big broadcasters have now all started measuring the socio-economic background of their workforce, with the stated aim of improving class diversity. Understanding the scale of the problem seems a good way to start addressing it.
Oh my God. This, I used to write all the companies down and it's ticking it off. Like the companies I wanted to get into.
Adnan is from a working class background. I've been following his progress for a couple of years now.
Remember this? This is the company that they didn't like my character. I did all of this for nothing. But Bloomberg. Ah, man. Oh yeah, it's for Goldman Sachs. It's all going to the bin.
He'll be graduating in a few months and he needs a job. He's applied for over 100 city roles and made it to the final round of a few.
So far, I don't have anything lined up at the moment. It's a lot of waiting. I've done a couple of these, assessment centres and things like that. But it's really, really hard. And it's quite scary because maybe there's other factors that actually play a larger role than just a simple university degree. Maybe like networking, people who you know, the way you speak. But the interesting thing is the companies who really want to do this diversity, inclusion, advertising, that's their next big thing in the industry. But in reality, you go into the office, you don't really see it.
Now, forget about the glass ceiling. There is now a class ceiling. The best jobs, it seems, are going to the poshest young people.
In 2015, a report by the Social Mobility Commission found that city firms were subjecting applicants to what was called a poshness test, and that one year, 70% of graduate offers were made to applicants educated at private or selective schools, when 11% of the population attend them. Have things changed since then? Cheers, mate. Thank you so much. Thank you. I had an invitation to investment bank Morgan Stanley. Adnan would love to work there and had travelled down from Leeds for the day.
Come on, mate, let's do it.
Are they opening up to people like him?
Okay, after you, mate.
Hi.
Hi, Rich Brown. Nice to meet you.
Adnan.
Rich, I'm Amol. Nice to meet you. How you doing?
Yeah,
nice to see you.
Richard is an executive director at the bank. He does a lot of mentoring for people from backgrounds like Adnan's and had offered to give him some advice.
The people who give people jobs at top professions in the city, do you think they really are genuinely interested in getting the best possible person regardless of background? Do you think there is actually an element of wanting people like us, people that are going to be a good fit with the organisation?
From my perspective, I think genuinely there is change. I think what's happened, even from when I was looking for jobs, there's a real understanding that actually having people with different ways of approaching things and ways of thinking, which are driven from a diverse having a diverse set of people together, really makes a difference. And also, we're in a global business world now, and actually there is a diverse number of clients, and combine those two together, businesses have got to change, and that's what's going on. But I don't know, what do you think?
Like naturally, you do need to have that, maybe like that polished version of yourself, and you need to show that you can speak a different way or something like that, because I think sometimes with these investment banks, they might be afraid to, put you with certain clients.
I think there's two things. I think you've got to try and deliver to the best you can be, because you're trying to enter a very high achieving profession. Mm-hmm. But equally, once you're in the door, you'll learn what you need to learn, and also you'll pick up a lot of the behavioural things from the people around you as well. Yeah. One of the people I mentor asked me this really funny question. He said, I've been really worried about what to wear to the interview. I've read on Google that I've got to buy a Hermes tie, because all bankers wear Hermes ties, and I've only got a pair of brown shoes, but is it okay if I wear brown shoes because I read somewhere on Google it's black? And obviously to me that's quite a funny question nowadays. In the 80s, I'm sure you probably did have to wear a Hermes tie and you couldn't have worn brown shoes, but of course you can get a job without a Hermes tie, and you shouldn't be spending money on that, and you can wear what shoes you like. You're not categorically not going to fail to get a job because of those things.
What's your kind of appraisal of his employability generally, as someone who thinks about getting people into professions?
Yeah, look, I think you're eminently employable. We want to hire the people that deserve the jobs, and you seem like someone that really deserves it.
Rich, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate it. Was that useful?
Very, very useful. Yeah, I appreciate your time, man.
So I noticed something, which is I must have seen 50 to 60, 70 people maybe in there. Every single one of them. Yeah. Do you know what colour their shoes were?
Black.
Black. Who are the only two people in that entire building that were wearing brown shoes?
Oh, me and you?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I think we're going to have to think about that.
Richard's good intentions were clear, and I was glad Adnan had the chance to hear directly from an insider. But I also knew some guys who'd written a TV series based on what they saw inside investment banks in the early 2010s.
You just do that before you embarrass yourself in front of your peers.
You see, what you've done there is actually erect a billboard to how gauche you are.
Yeah, nice one.
Robert Ware's Ted Baker, ladies and gentlemen, just so you know.
There is not a rule on the door of these investment banks saying do not wear brown shoes, but when you go in there, everyone's wearing black shoes. It's just something you should look around and you think, okay, wow, well, my brown shoes are really standing out here.
The judgment is silent, and then it comes behind closed doors with people of their stripes saying, did you see X, Y, and Z? I think there's something quite ugly about putting a vocabulary around that stuff. Yeah. I think people think it's almost too true to verbalise. You want to imagine you live in a class of society, so you would never. It's like the ugly part of your brain is thinking this thing. You'd never actually say it. You might say it to one of your friends, but you'd never say it on camera or in print or anything because it's ugly and it's weirdly fascistic and strange.
Then they treat me differently. Like I went to state school, and they even talk to me differently.
Hari has got in, and he's made it over that first rung of the ladder. But then he's very, very conscious that he's spoken to differently because he's from a state school.
I think no one would want to make anyone feel uncomfortable at these places directly. But I mean, I remember where I worked, this is in a public place, this is a lift, and I was just, braying toff in there, saying, and I caught the end of his sentence, and he said, and the worst thing about him is that he went to a state school in Winchester, as if because he's in Winchester, he has to go to presumably Winchester College. And I honestly could not believe that I was hearing it. And the guy he was talking to actually felt very, very uncomfortable because, there's me ducking in, a junior banker, not white as well, hearing this kind of really naked classism.
As in most elite industries, there's now pressure on the city to make its culture and hiring practices more open to working class candidates. How is this playing out?
Louise, Dr. Ashley, I should say, how are you?
Hello.
It's nice to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good.
Dr. Louise Ashley should be able to shed some light. She spent a decade investigating how the city thinks about class.
You say why the city isn't fair
Yes.
and diversity doesn't work.
Exactly. Over the last 30, 40 years, we saw a meritocratic narrative developing in the city. The idea that The city was opening up to a much more diverse demographic who were getting in on the basis of merit alone, of technical skills and competencies. Now that narrative has been quite important to the city's sense of self, and it's really important for its legitimacy. So legitimacy is a really key word here, because if you are earning a lot of money, you need to convince external audiences and yourselves that you're worth that money and its distribution is fair. And you can say, well, we have all these rewards because we're the best, and we deserve it.
We deserve it, yeah.
Exactly. But at the same time, the city has also been characterised by highly exclusive recruitment practices.
For her book, Louise conducted over 400 anonymous interviews with people either working in the city or trying to get in.
We all know that people with the right accent, the mannerisms, you can sound much more believable. Equally, I want to say that we can see through that, but the truth is we can't.
Image is very, very important in the city, partly in relation to status and to prestige, and interviewees were very honest often about how that plays into hiring and recruitment decisions.
It's easy to explain. Basically, we give the top jobs to other posh people who are our mates.
We hear so much about the business case in favour of diversity, the idea that if you recruit and promote on the basis of diversity, if you create more inclusive organisations, then therefore you will have more creative solutions for clients. And that business case exists, absolutely. But there is this alternative business case, which is much less explicit, this sort of under the surface, if you like, where there are clear commercial advantages in exclusivity. And one thing about exclusivity is that you can persuade external audiences that you're high status.
My manager's much more comfortable putting me in front of other areas of the business than he is putting my colleague, who's got a very Essex accent. He doesn't get to talk much because of exactly that. It's not who knows more or whatever, it's just that people trust you more if you're from that sort of background.
We tend to read off expertise, authority, from the embodied identity of the person giving it. And in our society, we are most likely to associate expertise and authority with a white middle-class man. Now, that doesn't mean that people within these organisations aren't absolutely passionate about social mobility, really believe in it, but there is that kind of gap between individual passion and institutional action. So diversity practices are all about offering an impression of inclusivity while sustaining exclusive practices, and that can be a way to legitimate the status quo. And it's difficult to tell young people that these things are going to make a difference for them, because it can undermine your own sense of self if you're somebody working within these organisations. But it is really important, because although it might come from a really benevolent place, it does make these kind of cultures much more difficult to navigate for the young people kind of struggling and hoping to get in.
I can see why there could be a business incentive for city firms to hire people who speak with a certain confidence and polish, and how that can often be associated with a private school education. And I find it quite hard to be honest with Adnan, people like Adnan, about how that sort of thing can make a big difference for them, because it's awkward and it's a bit uncomfortable, and maybe that's a big, failing on my part. But from the point of view of city firms, I wonder if there's a bit of class washing going on here, which is pretending to be interested in working class people, but as a PR exercise. John.
Hi, Amol. Thank you so much for coming in.
John Craven spent 6.5 years running a charity that tries to get working class students into top jobs.
We really work on skills development and confidence. At first it does kind of make you think there's a lot to do. I don't have anyone that I can speak to, this is my interview skills now, and I don't know how to improve on it. I don't have that type of thing I can speak to.
To what extent are employers really engaging with you? And do you think sincerely trying to change the class makeup of their workforce?
There are some employers where there's leadership from the top. They're really passionate about it. In many cases, they may have themselves come from a disadvantaged background and recognise how much harder it is now to get on. At the other extreme, there are organisations that don't see it as an issue. They don't understand the issue at all and aren't doing anything. My fear is that there are far too many organisations at the moment who see it as a PR opportunity, or a box to tick, and they aren't really interested in effecting change. We're actually often contacted by PR firms representing employers who want a nice article in a newspaper.
It's pretty dispiriting, really, isn't it?
I think it's even worse than that. There are some organisations that have been set up to really try to capitalise on this PR, and we actually now refuse to talk to them unless we can have a conversation with the employer about what they can do and what they should be doing and what they are doing. I think a lot of employers are looking for that diverse-looking photograph, and that might show gender and ethnicity, in terms of diversity, but it's not showing socioeconomic background. And actually, white working class students, particularly boys, are massively underrepresented at universities and indeed in top careers. It doesn't look good from a PR perspective to be saying, let's focus on hiring more white males.
So this is very, very swanky bits of London, right? So this is the area around Hyde Park and Regent Square. I'd invited media hopeful Seth to London to show him around the BBC. What in an ideal world are you hoping to get out of today?
I think I'm sort of hoping to dispel some of the ideas I've got about the BBC. I just want to see people like me there. I suppose working class.
Go on then, mate, after you. Cheers, mate. Right, let's head in.
Yes, boss. We've got to get you past, mate. Over here.
Yeah.
This way. This is the gallery. Marcus. Hello, mate. As someone who's trying to crack into the Beeb, how do you do it?
I would suggest going and speaking to people that, can you do some freelance work? Can you do some work experience is a good one.
Whereabouts are you from? London or?
I'm not from London, so I was in Hampshire. So I kind of defied all odds and basically travelled 3 hours every day for about 3 months or something.
And if you don't mind me asking, how did you afford to do that?
With the help of my parents.
Right.
First job, best job, Tiger Aspect runner.
And how did you get a job as a runner?
It is who you know, but I knew the managing director of Tiger Aspect. It was a very well-known independent production company.
Know any managing directors that you could tap up and send your CV to?
Unfortunately not, no.
Yeah. Tell me the vibes you picked up, what you found interesting or useful.
It sort of confirmed my preconceptions of what I thought. I'm not trying to criticise it wholeheartedly. There's probably other broadcasters that are exactly the same, but I think it's this element of people saying you can have experience here or there, but you can do it for free. It's all well and good. I can't do that for free, but other people might be able to.
So even the fact that they would suggest it shows a certain mindset built on a lot of assumptions about what is realistic or not. Because working for free for you right now, given, you've got a bit of savings from working at Tesco, but it's not something you want to do, is it? Better to get paid, right? Towards the end of the day, I spotted a colleague from the Today programme. Louisa is the deputy editor. Seth is desperately trying to get into the media and keeps coming across people that sound really posh, but Louisa...
No, there are normal ones out there, you just got to find them.
How'd you find him?
Yeah. What was your trajectory into it?
I did an interview for a radio station for something I was doing, and somebody said, have you thought about doing this? And gradually, every time somebody said there was a space, I just sort of tried to help out. But it took me a long time to be this version, I think, of myself in this business, to be all right with how I sound, how I act, the things I'm into. The fact I haven't read all the right books, you know. It's taken me ages.
What would you say to the things Seth has often said to me, which is from a rural, working class community in Somerset, doesn't hear his accent on the radio or on the TV very often, and he thinks maybe the media isn't somewhere where people like him are welcome. And, we both work on one of the most intellectually and culturally elite programmes in the country.
Yeah, that's a very hard question, isn't it? Because it's down to people like me to help, or it's down to all of us to help change that. If it wants to hire more working class people, the media clearly has a lot of work to do on the practical barriers to getting in.
as well as the signals it sends to people like Seth.
Hello and welcome to the BBC's News at 6.
Flick through any of the TV channels.
The Transport Secretary Grant Shapps has thrown a pretty significant spanner in the works of the UK.
And there's one accent you'll hear most often.
At a meeting in November 2017, a school nurse warned that...
This is received pronunciation, or RP.
The former British diplomat who served as ambassador to the United States.
Universally recognised, it's traditionally seen as standard English and became familiar to many of us through TV and radio.
The warning comes as the government rejects calls for further help with bills until...
But just how standard is it really? At Queen Mary University, I spoke to two sociolinguists about accent bias.
We looked at newsreaders' accents in the 4 main channels, and we looked across the newsreaders for all of the main news programs, and we found that around 70% of them used received pronunciation, so the high prestige standard accent. And in the general population of the UK, we have less than 10% RP speakers.
Wow.
And then of the 30% that don't use RP, the majority of those were what we would call national accents, so Scottish or Welsh.
I mean, I don't want for a minute to pretend that I'm anywhere near the bottom of that social hierarchy of accents, and I'm very acutely conscious of being very southern. What percentage were what you would call industrial working class from anywhere?
Less than 5%, I think.
Yeah.
But remember that probably 75% of the UK population speak those accents.
I guess the inference is that there is still a widespread belief amongst those who do the hiring that there is an authority, an intellectual credibility, a kind of reliability about RP, which a radically different accent, a Wolverhampton accent or a Scouse accent, would somehow threaten. Because everyone will recognise those Pathé videos, you know, the old black and white stuff, you know, of war broadcasts where everyone sort of sounds the same. And has the BBC sort of publicly said it doesn't want to sound like it did back in those days?
Yeah, so it was in the late 80s, I think it was 1989, the BBC came out and said that they're changing their policy, which, as you say before, was a one variety, one language policy, the voice of authority in RP. You know, due credit where it's deserved. They have done that. The issue is the question of where that's happening, though. So you hear a lot, you know, you hear more diverse accents on local broadcasters, so local BBC affiliates. You hear them in different, you know, programs, different channels, whereas newsreaders are still tending to be, you know, the national standard.
What's your research revealed to you about the importance of the news media in shaping perceptions around accent and accent bias?
We learn these attitudes from somewhere. They're not just sort of there out in the ether. So it's about the people that you hear presenting the news. It's about the people that you hear as our politicians in Parliament.
So I feel the kind of moral obligation to try and get some of these accents onto the broadcast. I think it would be really interesting to hear them on the airwaves.
Yes. So if we only hear farmers on TV sounding like they're from the West Country, we're surprised. All of us would be surprised if we hear that voice when we hire a lawyer or when we turn on the news. So we can be aware of our biases and try not to act on them, but the biases are there. They don't get eliminated until we've grown up around a mix of voices where we just break that assumed connection between what you sound like and what you might be capable of doing.
I got the chance to put the figures to my boss when I interviewed him at an event. We commissioned some original research in BBC Current Affairs on accent bias, and we found that across the 4 main broadcasters in this country, so BBC, Sky, ITV, Channel 4, 70% of newsreaders spoke in the poshest accent after King's English, which is known as RP, and that compares with just 10% of the population. Does that finding surprise you?
Not particularly.
Would you like to do something about it?
I have done something. I'm beginning to do something about it. Have you listened? I mean, what's interesting is you know.
Would you consider giving a main network presenting job to someone with a strong regional working class accent?
Of course, of course.
It's quite striking that it hasn't happened, has it?
Yeah.
You'd like to do something under your leadership about that?
No, but we're already, I mean, you begin to see more. I mean, you know, there's a couple of things happening as well, isn't there? I mean, I've pushed 700 million of spending we're pushing across the UK out of the M25. It's changing the BBC. You know, I had a meeting yesterday with a few presenters, and you know, new Radio 1 strand, out of Salford. Morning Live coming out of Salford. I mean, you're just getting... It's going to happen.
Adnan had graduated with a 2-1 in banking and finance, but was still job hunting.
This is the final round interview for a business manager role. So this is the decider. Oh, hi, nice to meet you. I'm good, thank you very much.
Nice to see you again.
You too.
So for the first 10 minutes, I'm going to play a video for you.
Okay.
What I want you to do is just imagine that you are in a meeting with the people in the video.
Thank you for taking this meeting at short notice, Emma.
So we'll need to know what regions you're looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Nice to see you again. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. At a young age, I really liked understanding how the macroeconomy works, monetary policy, so I always had that drive to go into that sector.
We'll let you know in about 2 weeks. We're just processing other candidates.
Okay,
We'll
sure.
let you know as soon as possible.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope it was a nice day for you.
It was nice. They appreciated the stuff I said. I think it's going to pay off, hopefully. I generally feel it's going to pay off. Yeah, I just came out the interview, and yeah, this was like probably the best interview I ever had. We'll see what happens, innit? So, love, bro. Oh my God.
While I was making this programme, some news broke about a city employer taking action to make sure people like Adnan get a fair shot.
Now, the accountancy firm KPMG has become one of the first large UK businesses to set a target for the number of employees from working class backgrounds.
What do you make of let's be frank here, a posh city consultancy putting working class targets in place? Do they mean it, or is this corporate window dressing?
I'd like to think they mean it. I think it's long overdue. I mean, I didn't really realise it was as bad as this. Obviously, this class distinction thing has always been there.
Kevin,
Hi.
good to see you.
Hi, great to meet you.
Kevin Hogarth was one of the people behind this policy.
How do you think the city, generally speaking, has done on recognising the importance of socioeconomic background in determining people's life chances?
I don't think it's a topic that's debated widely enough at
Really?
all. I really don't. And yeah, that's one of the reasons that we're trying to use things like the announcements that we made back in September 2021 around our socioeconomic pay gaps and our targets.
Tell us about the big signature moves that you've made.
One of the first things we had to decide is how do you define socioeconomic background? And we've decided that parental occupation is the best proxy.
So when you're measuring socioeconomic background, what specifically are you measuring?
We're measuring parental occupation of the highest paid parent, age 14. Which sounds very specific, doesn't it? It's very specific. But parental occupation has been shown to be probably the strongest predictor of what's going to happen, of what your life chances are going to be. And then we group those into three. So in that professional group, you'd have your doctors, your accountants, your dentists, your lawyers. In that middle category, you'd have paramedics, you'd have nurses, you'd have owners of small businesses. And then in the lower category, you'd have manual workers, you'd have plumbers, electricians, van drivers, delivery drivers, those sorts of occupations.
What did that extensive research tell you about the current makeup of KPMG?
So there is a gap to close. So we're not seeing people progress from that graduate and apprentice level into those mid ranks, and therefore the pay isn't progressing at that same rate.
So the class pay gap is bigger the further higher up the organisation you go?
It is.
That's an alarming revelatory finding. Are you actually hiring more people from poorer backgrounds as a result of what you're discovering about your staff?
Yes, we are.
There are some people that would say that actually quite a lot of this whole agenda is about reputational benefit.
It is about the bottom line, because we know that the data shows us that we deliver better client outcomes, that we're more successful as an organisation when we have diverse teams. So, if we send an all-male white team, God help us.
You don't have specific data on the difference to that receipt of new business made by the socioeconomic background?
No, we don't.
It'll be interesting to see if KPMG find that teams which are more diverse in terms of class are better at winning new business from clients, because it seems that for a lot of elite employers, hiring is about catering to very particular audiences. And those elite employers include the BBC, because a few months after KPMG, the BBC set its own target, saying it wants 25% of its workforce to come from a working class background. And the BBC's audience is the whole country. And clearly different industries have different audiences and different pressures.
How you feeling? You reckon you can do the headlines?
Yeah.
Have you had any sleep?
Yeah. Well, I've got a couple of hours sleep.
Mate, come in at some point and I'll show you what's happening.
I work on a morning news programme called Today. We were broadcasting from Seth's part of the world, as part of our commitment to doing 100 programmes outside London every year. I was hoping to get some local accents on the airwaves.
Hello, it's 6 o'clock on Thursday the 25th of August. This is Today with Michelle Hussain in London and Amol Rajan here in Taunton in Somerset.
My first studio guest was the local MP.
Rebecca Powell is MP for Taunton Dean, until recently the Water Minister, and joins me in the BBC Somerset studio here in Taunton. Ms Powell, good morning.
Morning, Will, and welcome to Taunton.
That's not actually my name, but never mind.
Welcome back to Radio 4 as a former Radio 4 journalist, as you were for Farming Today for many years. Why is there so much sewage on our beaches?
Look, I think we need to be very clear that actually we have a very, very good record in this country for our beaches and for our blue flags and for our clean water.
I was trying to help them get an MP on yesterday. Yeah. Rebecca's got a slight accent.
Yeah, slight accent.
But not as strong as Chris down in Dorset. Is really, really strong.
Right,
so,
yeah.
But yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Morning.
The second guest was an expert on energy regulation from London.
So the energy price cap was introduced in response to concerns about the so-called loyalty penalty.
It wasn't going so well on the accents front. I wondered what Seth made of it.
We haven't quite nailed it on accents.
So why do you think it's hard to find people with Somerset accents?
I would say, in our defence, it's not always that easy to get people who are talking about subjects that are in the national agenda on the airwaves.
Yeah, and I suppose, but you could turn that on its flip side, and what does that tell you?
Yeah, of course.
Is that who are these people that you're interviewing usually? If they're not from down here, why are they not from down here?
Yeah.
If you see what I mean. So there's probably not that opportunity for people to carry on. I mean, education prospects are rubbish down here.
Yeah.
The local radio show was broadcasting from the next door studio.
Yes, good morning. It's Andy Bennett on your breakfast show on BBC Radio Somerset. Stay tuned. Do not go anywhere, OK? Because if you enjoy a circus, then you'll love this show.
So I was sat out there talking to two of the guys who are producing the show, BBC Somerset show, and their accents are quite strong as well, but not as strong as Andy, who is Somerset born and bred.
Right, Dan Downs on the weather desk. We never ask your age, do we? We never ask it. You're like the Peter Pan of weather.
Andy's got a really thick accent,
Yeah,
hasn't he?
yeah.
But he's here on BBC Somerset, isn't he?
Rather than national.
Yeah.
Which I think is an interesting dynamic.
Yeah. Interesting badge.
As to whether they have been themselves ring-fenced to one area.
I'm about to do the end of the show, hang on.
All right.
That is it from us. Our editors today were Laura Cooper and Tom Smithard. The studio director was Ash Taylor. After the news, Sangeeta Maiska will be here with positive thinking about the impact of GM trees on carbon capture. Have a wonderful day.
After the broadcast, Seth invited me round for a catch-up.
You got a degree?
Yeah.
How did it go?
Yeah, I got a first, yeah.
You got a first?
Yeah.
I bet it was a starred first as well, was it?
Yeah, it was a high first, yeah. And I got the Dean's Commendation for Exceptional Performance as well.
So how are you feeling, armed with this first, launching yourself into the world? How are you feeling right now?
So I'm going to look more down the political route. So I've applied for a job with the MP for West Dorset, Chris Loader, and so I've essentially got that job. Chris is from a farming background and he worked on the trains for a long time, so he didn't go to university.
Does the fact that he is from a working class background make you want to work for him more, and also maybe make him want to hire you more?
But I think for the first part, definitely for me, you know, that's someone who is from this area, and I think I sort of see an element of that being someone like me at a national scale.
So if there were more people from those unusual backgrounds in politics or in the media, there'd be a kind of positive, virtuous cycle, wouldn't there?
And equally, I think they'd be more willing to provide the opportunities.
Yeah.
In terms of for people from that background.
Let's talk a bit about that day at the BBC.
Yeah.
I felt quite nervous when I showed you around. Yeah, I felt there were quite high stakes. And I felt a little bit like I was on trial because, you know, I wanted to help you get a job and I didn't want to overpromise and underdeliver. I felt like the BBC was on trial a little bit, but I also felt a little bit like, maybe I'm overstating it, but I felt a little bit like our industry and our kind of society was on trial. And to be honest, that's what I've always felt with you, and I feel it quite strongly. And I feel like you're an example of individual brilliance and social failure.
Yeah.
And, you know, you may well now, through this new job, achieve social mobility, which is, I think, a wonderful thing. I think you already have in a way. You know, you've got a well-paid job with someone who's close to centres of power. But the fact is, you've self-selected out of massive industries, and I think that's a massive failure in modern Britain. And it's given me food for thought. But at least we've ended up in a positive place, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Got a job and a first.
Yeah.
Nice one, man. Thank you so much. After you.
With uni over, Adnan really needed a job. He was awaiting news of his latest application.
Oh, man. I don't think this is going right. Okay, let me open it. I didn't get it. What? Okay, so this is what it says, right? Okay. So I didn't get the role for that job. However, they saw that I was very into trading and so they offered me a assessment center for the trading role, which will be around early September. We have taken a break from interviewing for this role during the summer, but should be back in early September, so I'll be in touch then. This is why I didn't like telling my parents that today I was gonna get a phone call or email.
I know the talent you were born with and the frustration you feel that it's trapped inside you, and we will set your potential free.
Social mobility is not just a moral imperative, but an economic one.
The party of the fair chance, the party of the equal shot, the party that doesn't care where you come from, but only where you're going to.
We will make Britain a country that works not for a privileged few, but for every one of us.
We must keep levelling up, keep unleashing the potential of every part of the United Kingdom.
We will transform Britain into an aspiration nation, where everyone, everywhere, has the opportunities they deserve.
Broadening opportunity seems to be one thing our politicians agree on. But why are there so many more promises than signs of progress? Lee Kane is from a working class background in Lancashire. He worked in one of the most senior positions in government as Boris Johnson's head of communications.
It's only when I think you access the higher reaches of these professions that you do see the scale of the jobs that really matter are still broadly unavailable to the majority of people.
Tell me what you saw. at the heart of power?
I think I was very lucky in the sense of the cabinet ministers that I worked with, and the former Prime Minister in Boris Johnson were big believers in social mobility. But I think there is certainly more broadly, there is a sort of unconscious bias within many industries, but certainly from what I saw, where the school tie still matters, the accent still matters, the contact book still matters.
You were called an oik, weren't you?
So I believe, yes, so I believe. A slightly outdated term. Luckily, my skin is thicker than my accent, so such things, you sort of let it sort of wash over you. But there's a sort of slickness that I think comes with, it's what you're paying for, I suppose, with a private school. And I think the impact of that is people get left behind because people misunderstand that for intelligence and talent. And that's a very, very different thing. And, where I was working, you would often see that actually a lot of those soft skills smoothed over what you would class as where ability would be. And, I'd say, I've worked with and went to school with people who are far more talented than I've worked with in top jobs, who just didn't get the opportunities. If you look at today's cabinet, under Liz Truss, it's close to 70% of the current cabinet gone to fee paying for private schools. That's moved backwards from where we were previously. And I think that most people, I'd say it's an unconscious thing, they don't really see how narrow the sort of group they surround themselves with. I think there's a genuine belief that these are the best people for the job, but you're really narrowing that cognitive diversity. You're going to get poorer outcomes when it comes to policy development and decision making.
How does that manifest? What is it that they don't understand?
You may remember during COVID, Marcus Rashford ran a fantastic campaign to extend the policy on free school meals. It was something the government, U-turned on. And we were sort of sat around this, debating it within the cabinet room, and people have to make difficult choices. Around the table, I remember having a conversation, there's 25 people around the room making this decision, policy advisors, special advisors, politicians. How many people around this room have been on free school meals? And myself aside, there was no one else in the room who'd come from that sort of background, which, you're in a situation where people are making decisions on something which they might not have that first-hand experience. And if we'd have had more people from, a sort of diverse background, perhaps, I think certainly we would have come up with a different outcome.
What does that tell you about how we are or are not going to get broader social change in Britain until you have proper representation at the top table?
There's always areas that you don't understand. All of us have huge blind spots. And I think, good politicians, good leaders in the business community, if it's an area that they don't particularly understand, they should be surrounding themselves with individuals who can, to ensure we get the best policy outcomes.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. It's great to see everybody back in the room. We've got a packed agenda.
I'd been invited to a meeting of people who do know a lot about this issue.
As part of what we're doing, we're trying to see what other people like you who care about these subjects are actually trying to do to change not just the conversation in Britain, but possibly the law in Britain to actually address class inequality, which is obviously a fact of our time.
Rob Powell grew up in Hartlepool. He'd gathered a group of lawyers, academics and campaigners.
And then we talked about the need to distinguish between origins and destinations.
They'd formed a coalition with some big ambitions.
Trying to really understand why is that the case?
So is what you're trying to do, are you trying to make classism illegal?
I guess so. We're exploring how we can make social class a protected characteristic in the Equality Act.
What does that mean?
The Equality Act was brought in 2010, and it brought together over 100 different pieces of anti-discrimination legislation, and it protects individuals in all different parts of society, discrimination based on their gender, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, but class, socioeconomic background, origin, however you want to describe it, was never included in the Act.
Let me push back on some of the positions that you're advocating. A lot of people would say that when it comes to other protected characteristics, gender, disability, ethnicity, you can see them and you can define them and they don't change. Isn't the whole point about class that it's fluid and that no one can define it?
It is very difficult to define social class. I think in the workplace, what you'll find is that most employers use a number of metrics to measure someone's social class background or origin, not necessarily where they are now.
But is there another reason why this hasn't happened yet, which is that there just isn't the kind of political will for it?
It hasn't really been on the political radar since 2010 when the Act was introduced. It's, amending the Equality Act. It sounds a bit removed from the day-to-day, but actually it would, I think, be a hugely positive development for social mobility in Britain. I think, government has the power to pull different levers. And if you want to kind of level up, then
pull your biggest lever.
Absolutely.
The head teacher of a school in Wembley, which is often called the strictest in Britain, has been appointed as the government's new Social Mobility Commissioner. Catherine Bilbao Singh will be responsible for levelling up opportunity and giving everyone a chance to succeed.
The government is advised on this issue by the head of the Social Mobility Commission, Catherine Bilbao Singh.
Despite the popular narrative, it's not true that social mobility is getting worse on all counts. In reality, the picture is more complex.
And for her, it's not all about elite professions.
We want to promote a broader view of social mobility for a wider range of people who want to improve their lives, sometimes in smaller steps. So this means looking at how to improve opportunities for those at the bottom, not just making elite pathways for a few, but by thinking about those who would otherwise be left behind, those who either didn't want to or could not leave to achieve.
What does the government think of changing the law in the ways I've been hearing about?
Very good to see you.
In October 2022, I asked the Equalities Minister, Nadeem Zahawi. The son of an Iraqi refugee, he was educated at state, then private school.
For loads and loads, millions of working class people and kids in this country, their feeling is that their prospects are getting worse and they weren't that good to begin with.
Up until the pandemic, if you look at the data around what I know about, which is educational attainment at Key Stage 4, we were moving in the right direction. The pandemic has been difficult. But you've got to challenge yourself as to how you can do better.
The implication of what you're saying, inspired partly by your own background, is that the way to do something about social mobility is through education. It happened for you, as it happens, it worked for me.
It unlocks everything.
But what about the other types of discrimination that people from working class families and origins often face even when they get in? The 2010 Equalities Act obviously makes other forms of identity a protected characteristic. In other words, it makes it illegal to discriminate on that basis. Is it worth looking at class in that same vein?
No, it would be my instinct.
Why?
Because I feel that we want to bring communities together, and actually the ability to do that is better served if we are not trying to sort of class as a real, I don't know, maybe that's just my instinct, has a real sort of negative connotation.
A stigma?
A stigma.
But isn't the stigma felt mostly by the working class kids who might be discriminated against? Could it making class a protected characteristic stop unfair discrimination against some of the poorest people in our society?
But I think the way you do that is by creating an education system that really does mean that those kids will never be discriminated against just because of where and what family they're born to.
There is such a thing, isn't there, in this country as the class pay gap, which is to say that even once those kids get in, the chances are is that over many, many years they will earn less than their originally richer peers. Do you acknowledge that there is such a thing as a class pay gap, and do you acknowledge that it's not something that can be explained by education?
Yes, I do. And I tell you what I think it is. Part of it is an imposter syndrome, right? Which I've certainly felt in my life. I think sometimes your background makes you less confident, for example, in a salary negotiation. but isn't attributing the class pay gap in this country to imposter syndrome a way of almost putting it on the working class kids?
No, I'm just telling you my
Okay, that's your own
reflection,
particular. But isn't it also possible that there are types of unfair discrimination on the basis of class, which means that people from poorer backgrounds are sort of kept in place, kept down there? And that's particularly important at the top of government, right, where you need a government that's representative. So when Liz Truss became Prime Minister, there was a lot of talk about the great four officers of state. For the first time, there's no white man. And this was seen by some people as a great emblem of diversity. And Liz Truss is probably a bit of argy-bargy about it, but she's probably the first comprehensively educated Prime Minister.
Yeah.
But those other three in great officers of state, James Cleverly, Kwasi Kwarteng, Suella Braverman, all went to a private school. Can you see why people might be sceptical that a cabinet so dominated by the privately educated would make class inequality a priority?
I mean, you mentioned the great officer. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Chancellor was on a scholarship rather than...
Quite possibly, yeah.
Sort of full pay.
Yeah, and he came from an immigrant family for sure, yeah.
Correct.
Why don't you consider mandatory reporting of socio-economic background as a way of really giving class the prominence it deserves in your social mobility agenda?
I think different organisations will tackle this issue differently. I would have an open mind to look at best practice, and I would absolutely look at the evidence.
To me, nothing could be more natural than wanting to get on and improve your lot. You don't have to be a working class student to feel that.
I just wondered whether or not you could offer some advice, basically.
I guess I'm just particularly interested in the experience of young people from poorer backgrounds, maybe because that's where I feel I can help. But I've increasingly realised that there is a limit to what I and others like me can do as individuals. As the issue these young people are coming up against isn't just social mobility, it's classism, unfair discrimination on the basis of class.
And there is a lot of it about. And we have to acknowledge that for some elite professions, it's rational, because poshness still implies prestige to a lot of people. So accent and all those little secret codes of behaviour, how you dress, your cultural references, they can all be reassuring. Reassuring for employers who are concerned about the bottom line, for programme makers who want to sound clever, for barristers who want to convince judge and jury.
And political parties that want our votes.
But working class kids don't need reassurance. They need a fair shot. And that means the rest of us calling out classism, no matter how awkward or embarrassing it is. And basically, we can change them, or we can change ourselves. What do you want to do?
What do you think people see when they look at you?
Look, you see our gold chains on our flashy cars. I see a lack of self-worth and I see battle scars. He has to be with 20 man when he wears jewellery, and you see it as gangster, I see it as insecurity. Where I'm from, everybody wants to make it out, but nobody wants to see some